This is the Beatles recording what John Lennon called our greatest achievement. By 1966, the Beatles were insistent that if we don't have to tour, then we can record music that we won't ever have to play live, and that means we can create something that's never been heard before. John suggested that they try one of his new songs, so he played Strawberry Fields Forever to the group, to which Paul replied, "That is absolutely brilliant." But what followed wasn't a brief moment of magic, but instead an example of their incredible creative process.
And he looked at me every spectacle and he said, "I'm sure you can fix it." And I thought, you devil. You expect miracles as a standard, you know.
The song began during one of John Lennon's reflective moments about his childhood. Strawberry Field was a Salvation Army children's home near where he grew up in Liverpool. As a young boy, he would play in the gardens, and every year there would be a summer party with a band playing, and his Aunt Mimi would take him along to listen. John didn't have the easiest of upbringings. He was raised by his Aunt Mimi as his parents were mostly absent, and a lot of John's songs, even within the Beatles, offer a reflection into these early years, and Strawberry Fields is no exception. John began writing the song in September 1966 in the south of Spain whilst on set for a film. Even in these first demos, where only the bare bones of the song are present, we can still hear the beautiful nostalgic tone of the song. As John was away from the rest of the Beatles, it gave him plenty of time to work on the song, and to begin to develop it into something more complex. Many of the early Beatles songs, especially the Lennon-McCartney collaborations, were written together and incredibly quickly. But by 1966, they began to work on songs independently and to spend more time developing them. The Beatles had been on an extended summer break, and so by now, Strawberry Fields was a song that only John knew about. In November 1966, after spending these few months apart, the Beatles returned to the studio for the first time since completing Revolver, earlier that summer, with the intention of starting work on what would become Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was clear that during these few months a lot had changed, both in appearance, now fully embracing their own individual styles, but also in what they wanted to do musically. Beatles engineer Geoff Emerick recalls a conversation between John Lennon and George Martin from this first day. "It's really quite simple. We're fed up with making soft music for soft people, and we're fed up with playing for them too. But it's given us a fresh start, don't you see?" Having decided to stop touring, the Beatles were ready to create a new record with a new kind of sound. Whoever heard of a band that only makes records but doesn't promote them by playing concerts? But the decision to no longer tour created an opportunity to make music that didn't need to be performed live. There were no deadlines to finish the album before going on tour, and no tour for the songs to be performed on anyway. George Martin said, "Right, let's get to work. What have you got for me?" Paul started to say something, but before he could answer, John shouted, "I've got a good one for a starter." No one I think is in my tree. And so, on Thursday, November 24th, 1966, the Beatles began work on Strawberry Fields Forever, marking the beginning of their recording-only chapter. Thankfully, many of the early takes have survived from these sessions, and listening through these takes, we can hear many of the challenges and incredible creative ideas they had as they went through the process of recording. Living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. So that was take one. By this stage, John had the basic song written out and he'd played it to the group, but there was little of the finished structure or instrumentation. The most obvious difference is that take one doesn't begin with the chorus or the mellotron, but instead with the verse. Although John was the first of the Beatles to be introduced to the mellotron, it was only after John showed it to Paul did Paul come up with the opening line for Strawberry Fields Forever.
This is a mellotron. You play one of the keys and it will play string sounds or a trumpet or flutes, and probably the most famous use we as the Beatles put it to was on the front of one of our records, which went like this.
The rest of this first take is notably sparse. John is now playing electric guitar instead of acoustic. There are very little drums, and George is playing some simple slide guitar performed on the mellotron.
I'm going to strawberry fields.
It's fascinating to listen to because you can see that they're heading in the right direction. They just haven't figured it out yet. On this first day of recording, they recorded just this first take, and rather than running through multiple takes, over the next few days, they went back to the writing stage, working on the arrangement and instrumentation. They lowered the key from C to B flat, arranged the song so that it started with Paul's Mellotron introduction, and then went straight into the chorus rather than the verse. I would guess the reason that they put this chorus first is that because the Mellotron has this really great ability to slide down in pitch.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields.
By take 4, we really start to hear the structure and vibe of the song starting to emerge. It also included George playing this little Morse code part on the Mellotron's guitar setting, which is maybe my favourite detail of the song.
Strawberry fields.
So now they've reached a kind of checkpoint. The song and its structure and the instrumentation is figured out, so now they can just record a good take and the song is finished. Not exactly. In 1966, the Beatles were still recording everything with 4-track. This meant that at any one time, they only had 4 different reels of tape to work with. You might have a vocal track, a bass track, a drum track, and a guitar track. If they wanted to add something like a guitar solo, you'd have to combine at least 2 of these tracks onto one piece of tape to make space for this new track. Take 6 was the first time they recorded a full take that made the final song we know today. But because they wanted to free up space for more tracks, they bounced this take down and for take 7 recorded some overdubs and John recorded a new lead vocal. They now had a complete performance of the song and it should have been finished. That was until John Lennon returned and said he didn't like it.
John came back to me after a couple of days after the session and said, well, it really wasn't quite what I had in mind when I wrote the song. Could we do it again?
Now, it actually wasn't too unusual for the Beatles to go back and re-record a song because they didn't like how it came out. But what would later happen with Strawberry Fields Forever was something that had never been done before. The idea was to re-record the track in a heavier style, as John had felt that it came out too gentle. So he asked George Martin to arrange some string and some brass parts. Meanwhile, the Beatles got to work on this incredible thunderous rhythm track. Ringo played the drums as loud as he could, whilst the other 3 Beatles and everyone else in the studio picked up a percussive instrument to layer on top. As well as this, they added these reverse cymbal sounds, which, along with George Martin's arrangements, provided a much more energetic opening. But as well as these added layers, they also made some fundamental changes to the song as well. Firstly, it's played at a much quicker tempo, but also they're recording back in the original key of C major. John originally wrote it in C major, but then they lowered it to B flat for recording. And the reason for going back to C is because the lowest note available on the cello is a C. More and more layers were added, including George Harrison playing this shimmering sound on the swarmandel, an Indian-like harp. And finally, what was once a gentle ending turned into a psychedelic chaos of sound with John speaking over the top. Finally, this new, heavier, energetic version was complete, just as John had requested. But just as before, John returned to producer George Martin and said, I actually like a lot of the old one.
He said, well, can't you take the beginning of the old one and then the end of the new one? 2 things wrong with that, John. That is, they're in different keys and they've got different tempos. And he looked at me over his spectacles and he said, I'm sure you can fix it.
George Martin and Geoff Emerick were now faced with this impossible task of putting together these 2 different versions to make one final song. Using just a pair of scissors and a vari-speed tape machine, they precisely cut the 2 tapes and lined them up. By pure coincidence, when they matched the tempos of the 2 different takes, they aligned to be in the same key. The final song we know today is a combination of these 2 completely different versions, Take 7 and Take 26. I can actually show you how this cut was made. Now, it's obviously much harder to do this with physical tape as they did, but you'll still hear how it was done. So these are the 2 takes if we were to play them just one after another, without any changes to speed.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields.
But you can hear there's obviously this sudden cut between the 2 versions. But if we slow down take 26 just slightly,
Going to strawberry fields. Going to strawberry fields.
and with a bit of crossfading, they perfectly flow into each other.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields.
After a month of work, the song was finally finished, and as John had originally intended, it was like nothing anyone had ever heard before. It never did make the Sgt. Pepper album. It had been a while since the Beatles put out a single, so they put it out just as a single along with Penny Lane. Their creativity at this time was incredible, and their willingness to work so hard to get something that was perfect was something no other band seemed able to match. Most other bands saw the limitations of 4-track as a reason to keep things simple, but the Beatles saw this as an opportunity to be inventive with these limitations, and to push the limits of what was possible further than anyone had ever gone before.